All right. So during this presentation, please make sure to turn off your videos and stay muted unless you are the speaker. This will help cut out the feedback we get from everyone's microphones. We will have a Q&A session at the end of our author presentation, so please enter any questions or comments into the chat box. And as I previously mentioned, this program will be recorded and available on the library's website. So you may be wondering, what are indie authors and why do we celebrate Indie Author Day? An indie author is someone who self-publishes in order to reach as many readers as possible and grow a profitable author publishing business. So our annual Indie Author Day is a very special event for libraries and its readers because it allows us to meet and celebrate achievements of our local and indie authors. Today, we have a wonderful panel of writers to share their experiences as historical fiction writers. I would like to introduce Roger Bradbury, Craig Bradley, Lorelei Brush, Bill Lewers, Diane McCauley, Jeremy Strozer, and E.A. Dustin. So welcome and thank you all for being here. Let's start with our first question. Tell us about yourself. Roger, would you like to go first? Oh, Roger, you're muted. There you go.
Of course. I am a novelist and a playwright, and I am currently at work on a musical, and I am entirely self-published. But it just seemed, after having my first novel rejected by 4 or 5 publishers, I still felt that it was worth it. And I went ahead and published it through a press that advertised itself as a good place for independent authors. And that's how Peace Now came into being. And since that time, I've switched to Kindle Direct to publish shorter work. One is a tall tale about an itinerant poker player. It is based on my experiences playing poker in the card rooms of Southern California and Las Vegas. Now I have a couple of other short pieces. One, The Mayor of Cannibal Flats, which is a play meant to be handed out at Halloween parties, and it's based on some actual events that happened in Colorado in 1883, and then a reminiscence about the importance of radio called I Remember Radio.
Great, well, thank you, Roger. Craig, how about you next?
There we go. Sorry. Yeah, I'm, as you can tell, a newcomer to Zoom, but and also a newcomer writing. The book I published to 2020 is behind me there. It's Peter Polo and the Snow Beast of Hunza. And so growing up, I spent a lot of time in Asia. And as this book is about northern Pakistan. It's set in the time of Kublai Khan and Marco Polo. And so I have 2 boys, and several years ago, watching them grow up, I don't know what prompted me to think about this, but, Marco Polo, I thought, what if he had a little brother and his little brother aspired to be like him? So I thought of some of the places I lived in Asia and just kind of put everything together to come up with this particular plot. And so that's the first one. And the second one should be out probably early 2022. And that's again featuring the same cast of characters. This time they're going to be in a kingdom in northern Laos, which was called Lan Xang, which means land of a million elephants. I lived in Laos for 5 years when I was growing up. And then the third book, I guess that's probably going to be about it for me with Peter Polo, but that's going to be set in Korea. And again, spent 6 years in Korea. So just kind of working my way through Asia, and I haven't seen that many books about these different places, especially back in historical times. So that's kind of maybe that'll be a niche for me with these books. But really enjoyed writing them, and I'm not sure, you know, in terms of publishing, I did it through an independent publisher. They paid for 2/3 of the publishing costs. And again, you know, if things go well with the second book, maybe, you know, they'll pick up the full cost for the third book. But nice to be here.
And Craig was kind enough to send me a link to his book trailer beforehand. So I'm putting that in the chat for anyone who would like to go and visit that on YouTube.
Thank you.
Great. So thanks, Craig. Lorelei, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure. I had the last 15 years of my working career in international development. And part of the joy of that was living in Northwest Pakistan for 2 years from 2006 to 2008. And in trying, you know, I published my first book, this one about Pakistan called Uncovering. And Craig and I must have like the only 2 books on Pakistan novels in the library, but it's a rare event. But I had a lovely time living there and wanted to talk about what it was like to be a liberal woman married into a family in a very conservative north of Pakistan. And it's set actually not quite historical fiction yet in 2006 to 2008. My adventure into historical fiction came with my second novel, which is called Chasing the American Dream, which is the little brown and maroon one there. And that's a story set in 1955. And I know we're having later questions about what's in these books and so on. I've been published through a small press in the Washington area called Mascot Books. They are a hybrid, and they have been very good to me in the whole process of publishing. So it's been fairly quick to end finishing writing of a book, they have accepted each of mine within 24 hours of my submitting the manuscript. And then the publishing itself has been very, given compared to the rest of the publishing industry, very fast. And I want to say that my first book was published when I turned 72. So my second book at 74, and I'm working on my third now. So anybody who's thinking about, you know, you want another career, it's certainly open and possible when you retire.
Love that. It's never too late to try new things.
Right.
So thank you, Lori. EA Dustin.
Oh, sorry, it took me a while
That's okay.
to get to the mute button. Sorry. Hi, can you hear me? Can
Yes.
you hear me okay? Okay, great. Hi, so my name is Elfriede Dustin. My pen name is EA Dustin. I have written a novel, Save Me Twice, about true events based on a 16-year-old who was conscripted into World War II towards the end of the war by madman Hitler. So it's based on true World War II events, and the book has also been translated into German as Rette mich ein zweites Mal, for those of you who can speak German. And I'm also currently working on a trilogy called Artemis Travels, which is a technical thriller. And part 1 of the book was compared to Michael Crichton's work by Kirkus Reviews. So I'm working on part 2 of that technical thriller. And all my books are available on Amazon.com. Full-time, I'm a software assurance engineer and work in space exploration. That's pretty much my summary.
All right, thank you. Let's see, Bill, I think you're up next.
Okay, thank you. I was raised in Long Island in the 1950s, and for long as I can remember, I've had 3 great interests: baseball, history, and politics, especially the election process. I'm a lifelong fan of the Boston Red Sox. Make of that what you will. I do have a degree in history from the University of Maryland, And since 1994, I have served as an election day volunteer county worker here in Fairfax County. And these three interests have inspired me in my writing career. Again, I'm a late author. Most of my books have been written since I passed the age of 70. My first book was a book called 6 Decades of Baseball, which I wrote mostly for my sons. And it's basically a fan's view of a lifetime of baseball memories. I've done another nonfiction book called The Voter's Journey. And then my election day experience caused me to write a trilogy of novels called the Gatekeepers of Democracy series of novels that celebrate election day and the women and men who make it happen. And then finally, I entered the world of historical fiction with my latest book, which is called 18 Days in New York, a novel about the 1924 Democratic Convention, which I guess I'll get to later.
Great, very awesome. Diane, how about you? Diane, you're still muted. There we go.
Yeah, I think I have it. So in answering this, to do this, I did a bit of a retrospective and did this kind of more formally. So I'll just share that with you. So every generation of my family has served in the US military and federal government. My great-grandfathers, World War I, my dad, great uncles and cousins, World War II. My grandmother with the Department of State, Office of Strategic Services, early CIA. My sister during the Vietnam War, her husband also in Vietnam. My eldest son in the Air Force in the Middle East and Africa. My son-in-law with Department of Homeland Security, my daughter with the Department of State. So these are my heroes. They exemplify bravery, character, and resilience. And all of this, I get to this in just a moment. I think as I talk about the book, you'll better understand why I'm sharing it. The title of the book is Grace Pointe, by the way. So I was born in DC and grew up in North Carolina, where I lived close to Fort Bragg, Pope Air Force Base, and Fayetteville. I graduated from a large desegregated high school when I was 17 and joined the Navy in March 1971. After leaving the Navy, it was full speed ahead. So, I mean, you're given a life, you become engaged in living, and you move forward, still carrying those experiences. I married and lived around the world as a military dependent. I had children, completed 3 degrees, taught for UMUC abroad and stateside. I lived in Japan for several years, then moved to Ramstein, Germany. Here I experienced terrorist activity firsthand, including a car bomb explosion on the base where I lived. Next to St. Louis, Missouri, where I earned my MA in literature, then to Hawaii, where I taught troops and dependents on local military bases, then to Rhine-Main, Germany. I was there when the Berlin Wall came down, for the first Gulf War, the catastrophic events in Somalia, and the war in the Balkan states. I taught for UMUC at the time, traveling regionally from base to base to teach military students. And I've never taught more dedicated students. In 1994, I returned to the DC area, resuming teaching for UMUC, and became a federal employee. My second federal position was as a technical writer editor, ironically with the Department of Defense DNA registry. This will mean something later on. The agency's primary responsibility is identifying current military casualties and works tirelessly to identify the repatriated remains of service members from past conflicts and wars, including Vietnam. This is profound work, giving closure long overdue to families. I went on to the Department of Justice, and upon completion of my PhD, the Department of Education. My youngest son is dyslexic and was the impetus for earning my doctorate. It was at Ed that I had the opportunity to focus my work on serving disadvantaged, marginalized, underserved, and often voiceless population, most of whom were individuals of color. I could not have written Grace Pointe at an earlier age without these lived experiences, some beautiful and awe-inspiring, others hard and crushingly devastating. Thus, not only was it the events of the Vietnam War and civil rights movement playing out close to me, but also the journey over the next 40 plus years that fed into writing Grace Pointe, published late in 2016. I cathartically transposed my own and witnessed life experiences from the beautiful to the traumatic and gave them a place to heal in Grace Pointe. Writing the book was hard. As the writer, I was that young person living through those years all over again. And while writing the book, I suffered the sudden tragic loss of my eldest son.
Here we go. My turn to forget to unmute myself. Thank you for sharing all of that, Diane. And then last but certainly not least, Jeremy.
Diane, I don't know how I'm going to follow that, but I'll do my best. That was honestly filled with grace. So my name is Jeremy Strozer. I was a strategist for the military for many years and then went into the State Department and had the opportunity to work in Vietnam doing humanitarian mine action. So helping remove the unexploded ordnance left over from that war. And what I found in that is that I started reading newspaper articles every day about a child or someone in the countryside who would pick up something that looked like a toy or a ball and blow themselves or their friend or their teacher up. And it took me from that high level strategic thinking that I had done up until that point in my career to realizing that all war is personal and it doesn't end when the guns fall silent. And so I wanted to start capturing those stories, and I started writing personal truth-inspired flash fiction of what I call the 20th century's war. So World War I, World War II, and the wars we keep fighting because of them, because they are not over yet. And I've written and published 4 books, Threads of the War 1 through 4, which are collections of these stories. There's about 100 in these 4 books, and I have thousands more to go as I learn new stories. And I write each story from the personal perspective of an individual going through a life-changing event in conflict. And so my books are purely a cathartic way for me to experience these conflicts on a personal level. And that's what I'm trying to offer up to everyone else, in the hope and dream that if anyone goes through these books, maybe they will try to prevent anyone else going through war.
Wow. Thank you so much, everyone, for your mini bios. I'm going to open it up to the whole panel now. And just tell us about your books. Why did you decide to write historical fiction? I know some of you have already touched on this a little bit.
So do we raise our hand?
If you like. But since you spoke up first, Roger, I'll let you go first.
Oh, okay, gee. I didn't start out to write historical fiction. I started out to write a book that helped me come to terms with the war in Vietnam. And you probably will guess quite soon from the title of my novel, I opposed the war in Vietnam and went into the streets to try to stop it. Now, that was somewhat unusual since I came from a family where everyone served, but I did not. And I didn't start out it to be a historical novel. It's just that the passage of time, creating a career for myself in health and human services and raising a family along with my former wife, Nancy, resulted in the book taking 4 decades to write. Part of it was the length. First draft, 812 pages. Sent it to a publisher in Oregon. And he said, I love your book, but I can't afford to publish it. Can you help me? Well, I had 2 young kids, right? Answered no. So then this was in the days when you sent self-addressed stamped envelopes out with your work. Then next thing I know, I got a letter from him saying, your book is 37% short of postage. Please send me the money and I will return your manuscript to you because it's too fine to be used as a doorstop. So I sent him the 37 cents and I got it back and I actually still have it. But then it seemed like every decade I'd take another tilt at the windmill and each time I would cut 100 pages out of the novel. But I actually didn't finish it until I actually finally retired in 2014. And then I sat down and came to terms with the war and in my case, the opposition to the war. So I'm sort of like a historical fiction writer by accident or by circumstance. I was thinking that the one advantage to writing historical fiction, if you start out to do so, is the fact that you know what happened.
Am I muted?
You know, and that is both, that can be helpful or not, but you're not just creating something out of whole cloth. You know, even when I was writing my own book, I knew what happened. I knew how the war ended. I knew about the devastation that followed because I was a social worker of sorts. And one of my duties led me to go into a slum called F Street, where many homeless veterans were sleeping on the streets, veterans with drug and alcohol problems. And my job was to try to figure out how to get them to examinations that would allow them to draw disability benefits. So it is somewhat ironic that I end up spending an entire career in the helping professions. And I start off with the veterans of the war who had baleful outcomes when they returned. So, and I should stop there. I don't want to step on anybody's time. So.
I can go next to, oh, yeah. Yeah, I just briefly, the reason I started doing this is for most of my career, I was doing analytical writing. So very dry, you know, don't use adjectives. I enjoy writing and, but at a certain point I thought, wow, wouldn't it be fun to write fiction? And I love doing research. I love history. And so, you know, I didn't feel like I still don't feel like I'm qualified to write a full-blown adult historical fiction novel. So I said, you know, middle school, that seems to be about my level. Enjoy working with kids at that age. I volunteered at schools. I taught school for a while. And so I didn't see too many books out there that covered periods of history that I was interested in, the Middle Ages and especially Asian history, that books that were written in English. So I thought maybe there's a place for me there. And again, Marco Polo has always been a favorite of mine, reading his adventures and other accounts of explorers. So I kind of just fell into that area, or I looked at that area and said that would be an area that I would, not only would I enjoy writing about, but just doing the research and all that. So that's how I got started with that, with my book. And it's been fun. I think one of your questions was, you know, what was the term, a pantser or a
pantser or a plotter? Do you write by the seat of your pants or do you sit down and plot everything out?
So I'm both. I try to have a little bit of a sketch of what each chapter is, just an idea, so I have something to go by as I go along. But then I kind of plod through each chapter, filling in the details and the, you know, adding color and all that. It's kind of like the way when I was a kid, I would always trace out something and then I would fill in all the details when I was making pictures and all that. So yeah, so I'm a kind of a combination when it comes to that. Yeah, but it is like Roger said, it's therapeutic. A lot of people mention that it's something that you know, it's a creative process that is so enjoyable. And that's why I love doing it, regardless if the books sell well or not. Thank you.
Okay.
Well,
All right, I'll go next.
Oh, well,
Okay, I'll go next. My latest book and first entry into the world of historical fiction is titled 18 Days in New York, a novel about the 1924 Democratic Convention. My interest in the political process includes how we select our not presidential candidates. Political conventions today are dreary affairs, 4-day infomercials with little suspense or drama. But that wasn't always the case, and the 1924 Democratic Convention stands out on so many levels. It is truly one of the most bizarre events in our nation's political history. It was scheduled to last 4 days. It took over 2 weeks, and it had everything: divisive issues, emotional speeches, out of control spectators, fistfights on the convention floor, wheeling and dealing in smoke-filled rooms, 16 candidates placed in nomination, 103 ballots, all in the summertime sweatbox of an arena. It probably was miserable to be there, but it was great fun to research and to write a novel about so many rich historical figures, some of them well known today, but many are largely forgotten. It's a great story and a perfect setting upon which to drop my fictional characters. One is a young female reporter getting her big chance, and she's also an alternate delegate from the state of Virginia. And the other is actually a character from my earlier Election Day novels, who due to a mysterious paranormal accident travels back in time from our present day to 1924. It was fun to research, it was fun to write, and hopefully it also elevates to some extent the theme of the increased presence of women in both the worlds of journalism and politics during the early days of the 1920s. And that's my story.
okay, I've got a story as well that has some similarities with the folks who've gone first. And this is this journey into historical fiction is one that for me started with my father's experience in OSS during World War II. And when he came home in the 50s, he told my brother and me incredible stories about the heroic stuff that he did. And when it came time to write my second book now, I sort of said to myself, boy, it'd be terrific to write about all of the incredible things my father did. So I went into the National Archives, and he was a captain, and I could find him lots of different places. But it turned out that all of the places that I found him had nothing to do with the stories that he told us, and that in fact, every single one of his stories was a lie. Now, at one level, this makes sense because everybody in OSS had to sign a statement at the end of the war saying, an oath, in fact, that they would never reveal what they did. And in truth, my father never revealed what he actually did. But in the meantime, he made himself out to be this hero. And I'm trying to figure out, he was very angry. And what I knew him as in the 50s was an angry man more than anything else. And so I'm trying to figure out why somebody who was that angry and had the experiences he had felt he needed to make a hero of himself. Anyway, because of the personal sort of connection to trying to figure out who this man was, who was my father, I invented this story of a man living in Cleveland, where I grew up, in 1955. And he just gotten a new law degree with the GI Bill, and he's standing on the top of the courthouse steps, buttoning up his overcoat, and he sees a man walk by with a very military stride. And David, the hero, is immediately taken back to Berlin at the end of the war, when the Nazis are parading by with their last magnificent show of who they were, what they could do. And David looks up at the man's face and he knows him. It's Dr. Gerhard Adler, a rocket scientist, who David had arrested at the end of the war. And the last time David had seen him, he was shackled in the back of a US Army Jeep on his way to Nuremberg. What is this man doing on the streets of Cleveland? So I got to do a lot of research and figure out some exciting adventures and do my best to make David into a hero. people might argue about what that definition of a hero is. It's a sort of everyman hero, not a superhero. But it helped me figure out what was going on with my father, and it helped me decide, okay, I can get over the business of his being angry and his not being a really great dad, because I now have come to understand, I think, what he was going through and why he did the things that he did. So it's this solving conundrums business that takes me into historical fiction. And I have another one coming up that is not ready for prime time yet, but is about my mother's family, because there are issues there that I've never understood. And it is interesting to me at one level, and a little bit humorous, that it takes me 75,000, 80,000 words in order to figure out one of these family issues. But it's a lot of fun doing the historical research. And I like the process at the end of figuring, wow, I really know what's going on, or at least I have one idea. So that's my story.
Thank you, Lori. It sounds like you come by your talent for storytelling.
Yes.
Honestly.
This is Elfriede
Oh, yeah, go
EA
ahead.
Dustin. Yeah. So I wrote about my book because I wanted to tell the story of my father, actually. So growing up in Germany, you can imagine I would be very interested in all the wars, and especially World War II, because my parents were kids and teenagers during that time. But when I was growing up, there was always this secrecy around it. And so when I got older, much older, I questioned my dad. And who is actually Carl? He's the protagonist in my book, who was conscripted into the war as a 16-year-old. And I asked him to write down everything that happened. And I turned his novel, his story into my novel called Save Me Twice. But I wanted to tell Lori Brush, who is an author here, whose father was an officer in World War II. I always say that if it wasn't for the GIs, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be here today. Because at the end of the war, my father actually ran from the Russians who were just murdering and pilfering. And he actually ran to the GIs with his hands held high. And the GIs took him in and put him into a camp where he helped the Red Cross and the GIs clean up the concentration camp Mauthausen. Actually, his brother ended up with the Russians, and he didn't survive. So I guess my story, is one that it's mainly sort of a thank you for the GIs that actually came and rescued Germany from the Nazis. And I did want to write about the horrors of the war from the eyes of a 16-year-old. And so people could also understand that not all Germans were willing Nazis, that the average citizen really didn't have much of a choice often, because if you were against the war, you would disappear. And one of the authors, he already said it best. I wanted to write a book that when people read it, they think they would never want war again. And a lot of people say when they read this book, it reminds them a little bit of the current times. So, Winston Churchill said, history will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. And this is a true statement for most World War II books, because they have been written from the side of the winner. And I wanted to tell a World War II story that you don't find in the typical history books. That's my summary.
Thank you, Elfriede. Let's see, did we touch on everyone?
I can go next.
Oh, thanks, Diane.
So about Grace Pointe, from grade school through the early 70s, the Vietnam War was the war of my youth, and death was hard to escape. I lived in a military community, and so all of the people around me, you were experiencing people leaving and not coming home again. So the book is my very personal tribute to all those who served, died, and were wounded. And I think I will get emotional. I think especially now, my brother-in-law who suffers from multiple myeloma because of Agent Orange and Parkinson's and on and on. So the suffering doesn't end at the end of war. And importantly, there were very few publications that I came across, pieces of literature that focused on the families and friends who waited at home for the loved one to return. So Grace Pointe acknowledges their incredible sacrifice. It's the story of individuals experiencing the long reach of war amidst the searing agony of the civil rights movement. It tells the story of a vibrant, loving small town and two close-knit families, one Black, one white, and their endurance over the course of the war. The setting for the book is a fictitious small town, Grace Pointe, in South Carolina, north of Beaufort. The time frame from 1964 to 1968. 1968 was a horrible year when almost 1,000 or more casualties occurred every month of 1968. Confining the story to a small town allowed me to distill the agony of an entire nation in one closely linked community, a community that found itself dragged into the war like so many towns and cities across the nation. The importance of conveying the everyday that makes up our lives, all the moments knit together, the beauty of friendships, families, lovers, neighbors was absolutely key, and especially the unwavering grace that an individual somehow finds during unspeakable tragedy. These became central to the book. They're the heart of the novel, made vivid through the characters. So through what I've already given in kind of my life snapshot and this brief detail of Grace Pointe, I hope you can now understand why I choose to write historical fiction so that readers can remember and learn from the past. And we've had other people touch on this in a variety of ways, but it's as with the inscription on the National Archives building, what is past is prologue. So because I promised my grandchildren, my next book involves young voices, and this current work examines issues of social justice, where two 14-year-old best friends solve a decades-old crime fueled by greed and racism in the rural South. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Diane. It was really touching. Anybody else want to?
Yeah, Stephanie, I wouldn't mind an opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Certainly, yeah. It's all of my stories are actually true, but the problem is most of the people who live them are dead. So therefore, they have to be fictional because I can't interview them and I can't get the truth out of it. So I have to create them in my imagination or through learning through others or hearing other people's stories, but then shifting them a bit to be that character. So, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to capture true events, but events that most people probably never heard of or never experienced or never even thought could happen in war. And the stories are each take about 15 minutes to read. So they are literally flash fiction. It is a quick, you go in, you get this narrative arc and you're done. And each one is simply a snapshot of one person's just brief moment that changes their life in some way because of having lived and potentially in that moment died in that conflict. And so the reason it's fiction is I can't interview the people, but each and every one is a true story derived from history and meant to teach a lesson about life experience from any age group, any gender, any geographic location, and any nationality who experiences the 20th century's war.
Well, it sounds like writing has become, for a lot of you, this really cathartic exercise. Would y'all say that your writing energizes you at that point, or does it more exhaust you? Is it a little bit of both?
It energizes me. It is the driving force behind a lot of what I do is the ability to write and share these stories, and thus vicariously live this experience makes me want to do it more because I want to share that more with anyone else. And it has driven me to go from the printed word to create a podcast of these same stories so that I could share them broader in whatever way people take in that information, so that it could be audible, it could be through written word. I have a dream one day that it could be video, but I haven't gotten there yet. So.
Right.
A tip from me, vet your videographer as if you were hiring him to perform work on your house.
I just want Netflix to pick it up. That's what you're
yeah. I've been, the musical that I'm presently working on, I've been lucky enough to be given a performance slot at the Wheaton Arts Parade and Festival twice, 2019 and 2021. And it's very competitive. So this year I decided to record a scene from Dora and the Howlers, which is the name of the musical. And I did not vet the videographer. And he came quite simply with extremely inadequate gear to record musical performance out of doors. So now I'm struggling with what to do with it because intermittently you can't hear anyone. And then, like, almost miraculously, everything came together for one song and we got a huge response from the crowd. But the rest of the video really does have me scratching my head. So, what was the question that I sort of?
Does your writing energize you or exhaust you?
I would say it energizes me. As I just did, you know, when you start talking about it, you forget where you're at. But I honestly believe that I am now doing what I should have been doing. And I do also believe writing is a call. And, you know, so I write every day something, and I'm always thinking about the next thing I could do.
I feel like
the
writing is something that, again, the word driven really resonated with me because I feel like it's something that I have to do. And it is energizing to a certain extent, but after 3 hours, 3.5 hours, I'm really exhausted. So it's time to go do something else. So I try to get up in the morning and do the writing when I'm feeling some energy anyway, but I don't want it to be everything in my life. So it's both energizing and exhausting.
I would agree on that also. I find it, whoops, am I on mute? No. I find that when I'm in the zone, when I'm really focused on what I want to do, I can't wait to write. But unfortunately, I'm not always in the zone. And when I'm not in the zone, that can be a real drag. And then it's exhausting.
Right. And this is Elfriede, EA Dustin. So writing energizes me typically, but sometimes when it's part of my research, I find out something that's shocking or, surprising. It can be draining. My current book of my trilogy, part 2, I write about some of the experiments on psychics or with psychics that were done during World War II. So that can be pretty exhausting to read about. And much in my book is based on true events. which I fictionalize. And even some of it is what I have, sort of experienced or lived through. And it can be draining to relive a situation. So it's both energizing and it can be draining and exhausting. So that was it for me.
All right, we've got a whole gamut of emotions going on. I love it. Does anybody have any advice for aspiring writers?
Yeah, I do. And I want to build off something that Lori said, is that this is not something that you can do all the time, every day. And especially when you're writing, in my case, about war, conflict, people suffering, you definitely need to take a break from it. And so sometimes doing the research and then doing the writing and kind of shifting your schedule around. And then also building off of what a couple of people have had different sort of paths to publishing. And one of the things I would say is, take whatever path makes the most sense for you, but you don't have to rely on anybody else to do anything for you. You could do almost everything yourself. And then you could find people who could do the artwork, the creative stuff. But you don't need any gatekeepers. There's no one standing in your way to publish anything. And if you want to get it out there, you absolutely can. And you could find a way to do it. It's not hard. All of my work has been done basically just by myself and hiring an artist to do the covers and an editor to make sure I didn't have as many typos as I originally started with. So that's really all you need.
Well, I'd like to go on from there a little bit, Jeremy, and say there are two things that for me came before the publishing that were immensely important and I think worthy of saying aloud here. That the first was that the hundreds of pages of government reports that I wrote in my job are not exactly the right craft for writing fiction. And that it was really important to me to take classes, to learn from people who wrote fiction, to spend some time thinking about what that craft was about and how it was different from what I was used to doing. And I really recommend the places like the Writers Center around here that will give you coursework, give you other people critiquing what you're doing that helps improve your writing. And then the second thing is to have writing partners. So as you're writing along, there's somebody who's saying to you, what on earth does this mean? Or, I'm really getting to the point where I don't like this character. So you have to evaluate for yourself, have I got the character that I want? Is it okay with me if people don't like him or her? And I've found both of those things very valuable up until I get into the publishing process. There, I agree with Jeremy.
I would say,
Okay.
I'd add a couple of things which I think are important if you want to write. First of all, write about something you really care about. If you're going to go for all the effort to do it, make it something that matters, at least to you. Second, make it a priority. You'll never find time to write your novel. You have to make time to write it. And finally, complete that first draft as soon as possible. You can edit a first draft. You can't edit a blank sheet of paper. So the first draft doesn't have to be any good. It just has to exist.
The one thing that I would like to add is, as an independent author, you have many opportunities and ways to publish your work, but some of them are simply rip-offs. And I say that because of my experience publishing Peace Now. One resource for all independent writers should be a subscription to Angela Hoy's Writers Weekly, because she does a great job of exposing scams and also offering you ways to see your work go from your manuscript to print inexpensively. Now, she is a book designer, editor, and so of course she would like you to use her service, but her service, if you choose to have someone design your work, is about the cheapest around, and I've never heard anyone complain about what she does. But Writers Weekly is a very valuable resource to keep yourself from being conned. And I have some friends who are in a writing group called Potomac Authors. And one of the things that we do is we are always bringing up and evaluating various promotional schemes that are presented to us and whether they're worth the money. And many of them quite simply promise a great deal and deliver almost nothing. So there are many pitfalls. Once you get the book done, then the work begins, which is getting it out there, getting it sold, getting recognition. So it's as a speaker said, you need to keep as much as possible within your control.
And I agree with all that. I would add, write because you're passionate about writing and you have a story to tell. Don't write because you think you will get rich from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's that part.
That's almost guaranteed.
Yeah. I'll just add a little bit to that publishing. I felt so fortunate, and now Grace Pointe came out in 2016, and some of you may have heard of it. I used a wonderful little company in Charleston, South Carolina, Create Space, and then they were sadly subsumed by Amazon. But my work, the book was, they transferred everything to Amazon, but the beauty of this little company is it was kind of like all under one hood. They took care of copyright. You chose a format, that you liked for dividing your chapters and font and everything like that. The one thing I did that was a fair amount of work was for my cover. I didn't at all like when it went off to that section of publishing. So I went on to royalty-free site and chose my cover, and then they did a beautiful job of doing title and the back and everything like that. But I wish there were more small companies like that. I have been researching. Now my next book is not going to be done for a while, but it would be great to find a lovely little company like that again, because when you're doing all this with the writing and then you want to tie a ribbon around it and be done with it, it sure is nice to be able to rely on a company that can kind of do the packaging. But as was just said, that's an easier part, getting it out there. Some of the book signings or getting it into a library, but then again, I think it's how big or small you want to go. Somebody may have mentioned it. I would love to see my book on the big screen because of the characters. If any of you read Grace Pointe, I think you will fall in love with the characters. There's some rip-roaring humor in it. It's not just devastating, a sadness. But I guess that's always, any of us who would like to see it in a different format after we've put so much, into it. Because I certainly put my characters through an awful lot as I was, creating their part in the story. So
I would just put in a quick plug. If you're looking for a small publishing house that really does take time to help you out and find artists and excellent editors, it's this. They're down in Richmond. It's called Brandy Lane. And so if you're interested in exploring them, I had nothing but good things to say about them. And the editor that I got really helped me a lot. And she also helped me find artists that were to illustrate the book. So again, that would be, if anybody's interested, Brandy Lane in Richmond, Virginia. Robert Pruitt is the publisher.
All right, anybody else have any bits of advice or wisdom they'd like to share? All right, let's see. What did you have to edit out of your book that you wish you could have kept in?
I'll try on that one. One of the themes of my book is the assertiveness of women in the worlds of politics and journalism. And my heroine in the story is a lady named Claudia, who's a young reporter who's trying to establish herself. One of the things I wish I had spent more time with, there was at the convention a lady by the name of Mrs. Leroy Springs of South Carolina. When it came time for the nominations for vice president, her name was placed in nomination for vice president, and she did receive some votes. She did not get the nomination at the end of the day, but she did receive some votes. And she does appear she does have a brief reference in my book. I think in view of the theme of the book, I wish I had included more of her in the book than I did.
Well, here's another take on that one, and it's not on either of the books I've published so far, but in the one that I'm writing now, and that is that I had to edit out all the sex scenes. And I have to say that, you know, I used up a lot of my energy writing those scenes, and I really enjoyed it, and it was very hard to let them go. But the people who read it said to me that it didn't really match what else was going on in the book, and it sort of was difficult for people switching terms of what is this doing in here? It doesn't really fit. So I sadly let them go.
Does that mean you'll have any plans to write romance in the future, Lori?
I don't think
Changed?
so. Oh.
One of the hardest things in terms of my stories is that each one is at a very different level. And so that some of the stories are about children's experience. And so those are really hard for some people to read because, you know, people don't appreciate, or at least don't like understanding war from a child's perspective very often and don't want to go through that. But others are really funny and kind of ridiculous in some ways. And so people do appreciate those more. And having those in the same collection takes people on this sort of emotional roller coaster ride. And I do that on purpose because I want to demonstrate that there are many different aspects of this experience in war, and it's not all bad. It's definitely not all good, but it covers the gamut of human emotion. And so when I thought about taking things out, because a lot of people had a very negative reaction to some of these stories, I actually turned around and said, no, you know, I need to keep this stuff in there so that it is this holistic understanding of the condition of human experience in these kinds of events. So I did not take those things out. What I did take out is curse words, or on occasion, slang that over the course of the century has changed definition. And so that what used to be called something can no longer be called that because people would get utterly offended and you know, so I'd have to kind of switch that around. And so an example of that is at the Christmas truce on the Western Front in 1914, the British called out that they wanted to offer the Germans fags. And my editor was like, oh my God, you can't have that in there. And what it is they're cigarettes. That's just what the British call cigarettes. So I had to adjust that a bit to make that okay for the age.
You know, I am a pantser, and I actually dictate my first drafts, and I simply talk a story out, which means that when I get to the hard work of writing, which is rewriting, that I am ruthless about cutting things out that don't fit the story. But thanks to the wonder of computers, you can save all of this stuff into a Slang file. And, you know, if you decide you want to do something with something you've cut out, you simply pull it up and go to work. You don't have, back in the day, people would have closets filled with stuff that they had been working on, but set aside for one reason or another. And the writer's shelf is a famous joke about people who do write. I honestly think that when I get to the end of something that I've been working on, what I really truly wanted in there is there, and the rest is all in the slide folder, and maybe one day I'll look at it, I'm not sure. But I rewrote Peace Now 16 times. And what happened was that the main female character, the main character's girlfriend, steadily assumed a larger and larger role. And that enabled me to see that what happened in the 1960s and later doesn't just happen to the person you might think of as the protagonist. It happens to everyone around them, and that we're all, in a way, are affected by the things that happen to the people we know or members of our family. And I will say, when I began the book, it was all about me, right? But it didn't end up that way, and I believe it's better for it.
All right, that was awesome to hear, everyone. I know when I buy a DVD, I always go and watch the deleted scene, so I loved hearing all of that. So just real quick before we get into our Q&A session, how can people buy your books?
Well, my books are all on Amazon. It's all 6 of them. 18 Days in New York, a novel about the 1924 Democratic Convention. I have a trilogy of election stories that celebrate Election Day, The Gatekeepers of Democracy, November 3rd, Primary Peril. They're all the heroes and heroines of those stories are the election officers. And then 2 nonfiction books, one about baseball and one about politics, and they are all on Amazon.
So my book, Grace Pointe, is available on Amazon. You can order it as a hard copy or Kindle. And for people who prefer Barnes & Noble, it can be ordered on demand. So you would have to wait for it from Barnes & Noble.
And I can add the same thing, both Uncovering, which is the novel set in Pakistan, and Chasing the American Dream is the one vaguely about my father. And it's certainly available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, but also your local bookstore can order these. They're also available through Mascot Books, which is the small publisher that I really liked working with. So easily from Amazon and with some wait in the other places.
All of us are on Amazon because it's the only game in town. But if you would like digital versions, then those are of course available on Amazon. But if someone would like a digital version of Peace Now, you should get it from the publisher. And the reason I say that is part of the story about when you pick publisher wrong. So one thing, if someone is interested in my work and my approach to the war, if you would like a signed copy, just send me an email to bywordsalone@gmail.com and I'll send you an invoice, and you can get a signed one and I can get a book off the writer's shelf.
And Elfrida has let me know that I accidentally skipped her on the deleted scenes question. So Elfrida, if you want to touch on that real quick, and then you can tell everyone where they can access your works.
Okay. So the question about what parts did I have to take out of my book? So my fictional stories of the first part of my trilogy included some stories of family members and friends. And I actually, some of them recognized themselves in the book. And I was actually asked by one person to take that part out, even though I would have been sure that nobody else would have known it. So I now always make sure to first ask for permission if I can include a story in, even though it's fictionalized. Where can you get my book? Save Me Twice and Artima's Travels. I'll also put it into the chat, but everything is available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any of those book resellers. Thank you.
Thank you, Elfrida. And I see Jeremy has put links in the chat to where you can access their books. Anybody else?
Yeah, same with everybody else. I'm on Amazon, and then the local bookstore here in Vienna, Bart's Alley, it's an independent bookstore. They have it there. So yeah, just like everybody else.
And Roger, did we hear from you where we can access your books?
If you can actually, Birch Street Books in Leesburg has a local author shelf, and Peace Now is there. Again, if you go to Barnes & Noble, they will order it for you from Outskirts Press. But if you would like something signed, the email is bywordsalone@gmail.com, and just contact me and I'll ship you one. Does anyone here besides me do open mic readings? Okay. What I would suggest is that open mics are an excellent way to start bringing your finished product and your work to the attention of others. That's an aside, but it is something I think is very valuable and is something that fiction writers rarely take advantage of, whereas poets have this very well-developed infrastructure of readings, and they get most of their sales at those readings. So they are well ahead of the prose writers when it comes to creating an infrastructure that will promote their work cheaply and effectively. So it's something that you might want to consider for promotions.
Thank you for that bit of advice, Roger. Did anybody have any? Okay, I think we've touched on everyone. Let's go ahead and move into our Q&A session. Our first question is from Renee. Renee wants to know, how difficult is it fictionalizing history, and how much of your stories are made up versus portraying history accurately?
I'll take a crack at that one. There's a wise, there's some people believe you can't change anything at all. The facts are the facts. On the other extreme, you have people who say it's fiction, you can change anything you want. I tend to try to be pretty accurate with my facts. I only change if I feel I have to for the purposes of telling a story. I do think it's important that the author be open with the reader and let the reader know what's changed and what hasn't changed. And usually you do that with an author's notes chapter or essay at the beginning or at the end. But you can change a little bit if it's not going to affect the real history of it. For example, at the convention, some of the delegations had more delegates than votes. So you got into fractional voting. You know, Ohio cast 22.5 votes for someone. Well, if I'm writing history, that's what happened. But in writing fiction, that doesn't really add anything to it. So I just rounded up or rounded down as the case may be. And although I don't say it, the reader is left with the impression that every delegate is worth one vote. And in my fictional world, that works fine. That works fine. So I think you have to be pretty careful about changing your facts and definitely let the readers know where that happens.
I want to actually add to the, well, reinforce that comment, that it seems to me that that an author's note, or especially a historical note, that when you are making changes, if you say that out loud, it cuts down on the number of people who are going to criticize you after it's published by telling you that I'm quite sure that such and such happened on the 3rd of January, not the 2nd of January. But if you explain in your author's note why you changed the date because of the flow of your own story, then you cut down on people criticizing, and they understand why you've done what you've done. But I, like others, try to stick as closely to history as I possibly can.
And this is Elfriede, Dustin. I definitely stick very much to the facts of history. I don't like to change the facts at all because there's too many conspiracy theories out there right now, and I don't want to add to it. But I definitely at times change the, maybe the emotions or reactions, or, because I really don't know, have all the exact details, but I do stick to the historical facts.
I do my best to stick to the true story, and the only thing that I make up is the thoughts in the mind of the individual who I'm trying to inhabit to tell the story as the narrator, because I can't know what that person was actually thinking at that time. So I can do my best to be in their space, but I can almost guarantee that that's not 100% accurate. But everything else I try to be absolutely accurate about.
I make up everything. I mean, at the end of the book, I have some details about Kublai Khan and the Mongol Empire and that sort of thing. But the story, it's for middle school kids. I've got a lot of little details in there that are probably true, but they don't even know if Marco Polo was a real person. So I just have fun with it.
For Peace Now, basically the underlying movement of the story is the escalation of the war in Vietnam. And when I come to a place where the story crosses history, I am absolutely scrupulous about getting the dates right. For the same reason, you don't want someone arguing about when did the March on the Pentagon occur, but and then get distracted into that. So it's something that you have to do. You are dealing with events that cannot be changed, which is one of the disadvantages of knowing what happened. So.
Yeah, I would certainly have to echo that in Grace Pointe, and sometimes they were just small instances, but I did, and even though I was, saturated, in it at that time, I was spent huge amount of research when I was prior to writing the book, even if it's a sentence, these things can be so meaningful to someone, and it could even be hurtful if you misinterpreted or you didn't take attention to detail to get a fact correct. So I was tried to be meticulously careful for details that I included in that, and the research that I'm doing for my current book that is looking at social justice issues around heirs property in the rural South and in the 60s, to be extremely careful about what you're including, while you have the latitude to create characters that will carry the story, so that you can share the truths about those things that that you would like the reader to take something away from.
All right, thank you, Diane. Sorry, I'm just looking back through the chat, making sure I haven't missed any questions. There was one directed at Elfrida, but it looks like she's answered it later in the chat. Does anyone want to activate their mic and ask a question directly?
I will mention something that Jeremy focused on when he talked about how the question of language and how he had to change some of the words. One of the challenges of historical fiction is we're actually dealing with two different constituencies. Our characters live in a certain time period. In my case, it's the 1920s. My readers exist in a different criteria. They exist in the current day. So I had to make a decision, for example, not to include a whole lot of 1920s slang in my story, even though that might be what the characters are talking about, because it would just get in the way of the reader understanding what you're talking about. By the same token, you have to try to avoid using current slang in your story if it's in a time period. So there are all kinds of things like sounds like a plan or a done deal, or things that we say all the time, which would be completely out of place and could not plausibly be used in the 1920s. So I wound up having to research a whole lot of phrases and expressions that I'm comfortable with to find out whether or not they even existed in the 1920s. And sometimes I find some interesting things, like a penny for your thoughts goes all the way back to Sir Thomas More in Renaissance England. However, the natives are restless. Turns out that was first used in a 1932 movie, so I couldn't use it. So it's interesting the kind of research and considerations you have to be with respect to language. Now, if you're talking about Genghis Khan, you don't worry about language at all, and because I don't think any, yeah. But to some extent, yeah. But I think it's a consideration that every author has to balance when they're creating their work, depending upon the time period and the sensitivities also of the current readers.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Bill. We've got about 10 minutes left. Does anybody?
Can I add something really quick?
Oh, sure.
The person, Kay Murty, who asked the question about whether whether veterans want to talk about, World War II, because he or she ran into this issue about they didn't want to talk about it in the 60s. And I guess what I wanted to add is, unfortunately, all the World War II veterans are now, they're all disappearing. And I think it's just so important that their stories are written down.
Yeah, thank you, Elfrida.
On all sides.
Yeah,
and I wanted to mention to you, if you're interested, okay, great, hi. And I wanted to mention to you, if you're interested, there's a couple Facebook groups where relatives actually talk about their fathers or their grandfathers' experience during World War II.
Oh, wonderful. If you could send me a link or something, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
So much.
Yeah, I would like to add something to that. People of the Vietnam era are passing from the scene. A part of the reason I wrote Peace Now was for people my age, though people my age sometimes react very negatively to the book because of my political leanings. But we have to do that. It seems like there are certain years that no one will write about. One is the flu epidemic of 1918. Is rarely treated. Fortunately, Catherine Ann Porter, the great short story and short novel writer from West Texas, wrote Pale Horse, Pale Rider. And if you ever want to experience that period, she's the very best place to go. Not only do people forget quickly, they forget with vehemence. If you've noticed, when you're talking to people these days and someone mentions something that happened in, say, well, that happened last year, right? And it turns out last year is 2019, because almost no one, even now, wants to talk about 2020 and what we endured with the pandemic. And in some places, people are still facing it. One of the years that no one wants to talk about is 1968, because 1968 had the highest rate of death and casualties among young men of any year of the war. And no one, and I mean no one, talks about it unless they were directly affected, like some of the authors here, and it's Diane, right? You
Yeah.
were
Yes.
you were
Yes.
directly affected by
Yeah.
it, but
Truly horrible. Truly horrible.
36,000 young men died in the jungles of Southeast Asia in 1968. People do not wish to remember that year. And in a way, I won't say asking people to remember or maybe forcing them is one of the reasons that I wrote Peace Now. You know, I could have disappeared into the great New Left diaspora and never been heard from again, right? But I chose to write about that era. One, in my own instance, to come to terms with it. I mean, like I said, I am from a military family. My older brother was the master sergeant in the Air Force who signed up to fight Mr. Wilson's war and was gone for 10 years. So it's, in a way, in some ways, when you write historical fiction, you are truly doing a service to preserve the memory and the stories of the people who lived through the era. Not for me, because I'm, really free spirit and too far to the left for most people, but other people, when they do the work, they do a service. I'm just trying to tell a good story.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. Renee says, I want to write but struggle making the time. When do you write? What advice can you offer?
I think everyone has to determine. I think everyone has to determine what time works for them. For me, it's usually in the morning after I do the things I absolutely have to do, like get dressed and whatnot. Then I postpone the routine. I don't need to be alert to go to Giant to shop, but I do need to be alert to write. So for me, it's early in the morning that works best. But each person has to find out where their sweet spot is, so to speak.
The hard truth is that if you are a working adult, you must wring the time from somewhere. And during when Nancy and I were raising the kids, even though I am not a morning person by any sense of the word, I would get up at 5:30 in the morning and go into the den and work so that I could get the writing done before everyone else got up at 6:30 and the day began. Because once the day began, there was no time, It's very difficult. You have to set aside time And even if that means some real physical pain, which is getting up early for someone like me.
I'll build off of that, Roger, is that actually it really helps to have back problems, because if you're not sleeping, you could just get up and write in the middle of the night. But if you somehow get to sleep through the evening, getting up at 5 a.m. when your body says, I can no longer lie in this bed, and everyone's still sleeping, is the absolute perfect time for me. And so I usually write between 5 and 7 a.m.
Right, I wouldn't wish back problems on anyone, but honestly, insomnia is a good thing for a writer to have, right? Yeah. Yes. You know, I wouldn't wish that on anyone either, but honestly, I've done some of my best work at 3 a.m.
Yeah, I would add to that. I felt like for Grace Pointe, a lot of the time, I mean, I was a full-time employee and had so many other things, you know, going on, but there was so much interior, you know, work. You can lay down at night, or when you're doing your commute, or standing in the shower. And I tried, even if it was just putting a note in a phone or jotting something down to keep track of, keep track of it. And because of the timing of when I was still, I'm retired now, but a federal employee, I often wrote late at night, especially when, there were some of the hard chapters, and I'd be sitting there crying while I'm putting these characters through these awful parts or something like that. But I really just tried to catch as catch can, if you will, when, if you have an idea, it might even just be a phrase, and you never know how that will develop or what it might mean, to a character or your storyline or something like that. So, and I don't know if this is helpful at all. People might have their, own rhythm, but I didn't write in order. I often wrote what I called my more difficult chapters. If I was able to, I would deal with them and then go back and kind of write around it. But I had to chuckle. I can't remember, it might have been Roger talking about, saving things on the computer and printing. So this will date me somewhat, but I did print out, I did have versions, and I had an external hard drive. And I had some forced editing. I no longer have I use a laptop, something that's not hooked up to anything, let alone a hard drive to systems, because there was a large electrical system blow up in my neighborhood, and I lost untold chapters of my book. So I had some instant editing done for me when I had to go back and try to, it was a horror, try to recreate that. So I do things differently now, but I'm old school. I still like pen and paper. I still like sometimes to print things out and go back to it. Sorry to be so long-winded on time and issues, writing and editing.
Well, there's such a good feeling about holding a ream of paper in your hands, right? And thinking, I did this, right? It's like buying albums instead of downloads. It costs 5 times as much, right? But an album, it's physical, you can touch it, it's tactile, and they have the great liner notes, right?
Yeah.
Very different from just shipping it up to the cloud and never thinking about it again or whatever.
It does mean a lot to hold your first book and say, this we produced. And then to be able to build off of that and then to make a pile and be like, wow, I could leave something that my kids know I existed, because if they forget me. So.
Okay, well,
We writers, we get our pleasures in strange ways, right? Just handling a book. But another thing before we go, several people have said what they do to try to relieve the pressure of perhaps or the work from writing, or give themselves a break, right? So I started playing music to break the isolation of writing, because it is labor intensive if you're by yourself for long periods of time, right? And suddenly I began to see myself, writing a musical and because I was trying to bring the halves of my life together. So some of the things we do may actually, to give us a break from writing, may actually encourage us in subtle ways. So we all need a break from ourselves at some point in time, right? But we just work. That's all.
all right, well, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time. I want to give a big thank you to all of our authors today for being a part of our panel and sharing your experiences as writers. We hope to see everyone tomorrow at 12 noon for Let's Talk About Children's Books. You'll meet our panel of local authors as they discuss their books and journeys as writers. I've included the link to that event in the chat. And we hope to see you all tomorrow. Thank you, everyone, authors and audience, for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is
Thank you.
wonderful.